While technology is absolutely transforming how we approach solutions within the health sector, you have to look at it as a process, starting with who the client is, ultimately the citizen or the patient that is being served, and then how you work within an ecosystem of partners, including the government, NGOs, other private sector companies, to first better define and sufficiently define the problem before you start developing solutions. So technology is not some magical change maker on its own. It's something that enables the change when you work effectively within the ecosystem. Right now, I'd say it's hard to quantify, but in terms of qualitative terms, we see a number of anecdotal examples where appropriate use of technology, not only using, say, cell phones, but it's more about the information that you can both collect as well as disseminate through devices, through the technology that is the game changer. In the case of our program, and one of the examples that I gave in my presentation was re-engineering the early infant diagnosis program, the infant HIV testing program. Under this scenario, you have roughly 150,000 infants in Kenya a year that are tested for HIV. In the old style process, you had to rely on an analog, outdated postal system where results simply were not getting back, to the mothers and to the health workers. And with the new system and using appropriate technology, you now reliably have results back to the healthcare worker and to the mother in under 30 days, which is then initiating treatment for HIV positive infants. So we believe that just in this one example alone in Kenya, in the last 2 years, there are probably over 15,000 infants whose treatment for HIV has been directly impacted, but in total over 200,000 infants that have been impacted through the use of this transformative program. I was actually very happy to hear the question raised, or really the complaint raised, that solutions are being implemented far too quickly without really thinking about the end user, the customer in mind. And as I pointed out in the presentation, I think the process approach to problem solving is the best way that you can safeguard against that. I mentioned that if your solution is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That's a mantra that I take on, of keeping in mind you start with the client, you start with the customer, you understand their needs, which in the case of this woman in the audience, she wants very easy to use, one button click solutions. Instead of sort of the remote control with 30 different buttons that you don't know how to use. So starting with a very clear understanding of who's your client, what are their needs, and then design the solution to address their needs. That's the best way you can safeguard against the type of frustration that she communicated.
At Hewlett Packard, from those billions.
I think every company has their stories, has the skeletons. I would say in our case with HP, recently we have taken on board the importance even more so about starting with the market need, with the customer needs, and designing those products. Certainly looking at at what we're doing in the personal device, the personal computing space now, there are a myriad of opportunities. There are a myriad of options available to consumers. In particular, I think looking at the millennial generation and younger generations, it's even more critical now, that we're tuned into their needs rather than designing products, purely for, older generations, or say for enterprise, but not for consumers as well.
And
I would start by saying that I think back to something that Thomas Edison had once quipped, that vision without execution is hallucination, and something like one laptop per child is an absolutely grand vision, but at the end of the day, any solution, any vision that you have ultimately has to be implemented locally, and taking a big grand vision like that takes a lot of work and a lot of engagement that isn't necessarily unique from one country, from one community to the next. And until you have that ecosystem built out and engagement of the players locally, it's your vision or it's someone else's vision, it's not their vision. Involving the community that you have all these great intentions of serving is absolutely critical. You can't be sort of parachuting in a technology or a solution and thinking that it's going to be effective unless there's been consultation and genuine engagement with the local community before you actually start the solution design.
What are some HP?
I think one of the solutions that I had referred to, we have been working for 2 years on a 3G enabled printer, and again, this started with very clearly defined needs that we had to scope out with rural health care workers. Unreliable electrical grids, lack of access to the internet, but very robust cellular infrastructures meant that we were able to develop a GSM-enabled or a 3G network-enabled printer that still connects rural care centers, and now even rural education classrooms are looking at this technology as well. So I think this opens up a market that, quite frankly, hasn't even been well quantified at this stage. It's a completely new market opportunity, and I'm very excited about that. Another, with the pervasiveness of cell phone networks, being able to develop apps. One particular solution that we've been working on that we call the Visual Survey Platform. We've worked with a number of NGOs, including Foundation Paraguay, Martin Burt, to develop a survey, a questionnaire tool that can run on a number of platforms, smartphones, tablets, laptops, number of different operating systems. Very easy to use survey tool that community workers can not only collect data faster, they have the results, they can analyze right there on the spot and start interventions with the communities that they're meant to serve, rather than collecting information on paper, sending it back to be keyed in at a data center somewhere, and then coming back weeks later to have a conversation about the results. So compressing down that time, collecting information, being able to analyze it and act on it in minutes instead of weeks is a huge breakthrough, and we're really excited about that.
One last question.
It's a really good question, and it actually, James, strikes at the heart of understanding of developing versus developed markets today. That in many respects, an urban myth is that the developing markets are countries that need aid, that companies like HP are simply doing charity work. The growth, the future economies are growing out of developing markets today. That's where the real growth is coming from, and quite frankly, that's also where the innovation is coming from as well. So rather than looking at what we broadly define as developing countries today, as nations and communities in need of aid, these are market opportunities, and we look at the individuals and the communities within these countries, as partners in growing the economies and improving the quality of life, for the citizens in those countries, rather than beneficiaries of any sort of aid programs, and overall, looking at the opportunity simply as revenue, I think we need to broaden the dialogue to look at innovation, human development, as well as even more broadly the environmental development as well.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist one. worried about?
It's a really good question. I think as Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, if you're sitting still, you're going to get run over. If anything, I believe the innovation that's that's being driven out of developing markets today is a reminder and a wake-up call that you have to keep innovating. There is no product sector, there is no element of the market where we or our competitors compete that is really safe. You have to keep innovating. The circumstances, the expectations continue to evolve, and so you need to stay ahead of that. I think what's also exciting though is that rather than strictly looking at the competition as someone you're working against and someone you're trying to do better than, new models, new paradigms of say co-opetition, where in one respect an organization might be your competitor, in another they might actually be your partner. So we need to think not so linearly. I can't say that one. We need to think in different ways. We need to look at breakthrough and paradigm shifts and how we look at market opportunities as well as who we compete against.